Trans dating, and already on just saying the topic of today's video, we gotta do a little clarifier, because when I initially told people that that was what I was going to be making a video on, there seemed to be a tiny bit of confusion. A couple of people thought I was going to be talking about what coming out as trans does to your sexuality, and I'll quickly just say as a general rule, gender and sexuality are not connected, and so transitioning does not necessarily mean that who you are attracted to will change. Though it can allow some people to better understand their emotions and feelings around dating or romantic stuff to the degree that it seems as if coming out as trans has changed who they like to date. But it would be more accurate to say that they always probably had that sexuality and were just uncomfortable expressing it before feeling like themselves. Okay, so that's the simple thing answered. What I'm actually going to be talking about today with trans dating is the most complicated and oft-repeated argument I see around it, which is the idea that cis people have, mostly cis men, of declaring that they will not date a trans woman due to their preferences, and the variety of statements that explode out from that initial point. See, I thought this stuff is contentious, and full of a lot of anger, so it's time to dive in and give my take on it in a way that will hopefully, to some people, honestly I'm hoping this will be useful to the cis men who are more willing to hearing things out, and the allies or trans people who will have to deal with them, but I hope this might be a helpful resource to them. So, this one is for you lot. Buckle in and buckle up as we go on a journey through breaking down the idea of preference to discussing the defences that come up from men about this, and finally onto the big scary thing that I believe is what really gets a lot of these guys' hackles up, the notion of internalised transphobia and what that means. So yeah, let's get into it. Where I want to start is with the first thing on that list, which is that oftentimes when we're talking about this, it gets labelled as a dating preference, that people just have a preference for not dating trans women, and ipso facto, it's actually kind of offensive to suggest that this guy should go against their dating preferences because you, want them to? I mean, you wouldn't tell a person who has a preference for blondes that they have to go out and date redheads, or a person who wants their partner to enjoy Magic the Gathering that they should have to date someone into Riftbound. That would be about as bizarre as the examples I chose, and almost as if you're infringing on their rights and free will, so counter-cancelled. Yeah, I'm being a little bit facetious here. I find this line of thinking kind of tiring, honestly, because what it really isn't recognising is that what we are discussing here from the men who argue that they would never date a trans woman is an exclusionary principle, not a preference. These guys are not stating that there is something that would... These guys are not stating that there is something that would be ideal for their dating type, like blondes or Magic players, but if they found themselves in the position where they like someone outside of that ideal, they wouldn't stop themselves from exploring the possibility, which is what a preference is. What they're really illustrating is that they would never, ever consider dating a trans woman in any circumstance. And if they found out someone they liked was trans, bam, they're off the possibility list. It's more similar to gay men and not wanting to date women because, well, think about that for 2 seconds and I reckon it might sort of become obvious why a gay man wouldn't date a woman. And that similarity is in reality quite close because at the heart of it, a lot of these cis guys do view trans women as men in their minds, and so would not date any trans women because that's what they consider to be outside of their sexual identity pool. However, saying such a thing as that does make you look a little less sympathetic, like coming out with the full logic behind the barrier is less appealing than declaring it as a preference when that's just not what a preference means. It's a small part of what I really want to talk about here, and is frankly more of a grammatical annoyance, but it is a grammatical annoyance that I do think plays a part in the larger core of what we want to discuss here. Which is, at the end of the day, all of these arguments, all of the logic, all of it is being utilised to try and diffuse any notion that the cis men are entirely dismissing a group of women from their dating options based on a dislike or internalised views of that minority group. It's disingenuous behaviour, and I don't think it's an uncommon disingenuous behaviour that we see from people with internalised bigotries towards a particular group of people. Nobody wants to be called a transphobe or a racist, so you try to diffuse that situation. It's disingenuous behaviour, and that theme continues in the arguments that then come up when these cis men get pushed on the reasoning for why they would completely block off all trans women as options romantically or sexually. So let's move on to the defences that get chucked out. And before you ask, how the hell do I have all this information, and where have I got it from? The answer is from numerous debates with cis men around this, both online and in person. And to be clear, both in those arguments and here in this video, I am not doing any of this in an attempt to make these cis men date me. I don't want to date you at all, honestly. I think you've got a lot you need to work through, and I think I can personally do better and find someone who isn't going to be disgusted or grossed out by me due to some internalised issues they've got going on. Crazy, I know, but as you will get to after this bit on the defences side, the reason behind this whole video is to try and help you, cis man, do some introspection about your attitudes and consider your view on things, in the hope that it might help you develop and evolve as a person. Maybe it's not gonna make you go out and date a trans woman, but that's kinda not the point. If at the very least you recognise that a dating exclusion that you are clinging to is rooted in outdated views of an entire minority group and a stereotype developed disgust, then that's frankly a great start and good enough for me. Jesus, I know it's a lot of disclaimers happening here, and I hope it doesn't feel too much like I'm coddling, but I'm aware that this whole topic really does make people feel backed into a corner. Nobody likes being called a bigot, as we said earlier, even subconsciously, so I want to make it clear that this is trying to be helpful and not shaming. I fear I may have failed a little bit in that, but let's move on to the responses that I've heard, eh? So the first and biggest one that I often get told immediately when a cis man tells me that he doesn't date trans women at all and that he never would, and I then ask him, well, okay, but what if you found a trans woman who you were super attracted to and who almost seemed like the perfect fit for you? Why would you not allow yourself the opportunity to explore that? Is the I want to have biological children stance. A stance that is based in the idea from the cis man that they want to have children with a partner who is able to carry their sperm and give birth to a baby combining both of their explicit DNA code. No adoption, none of that surrogacy shit. And so that immediately dismisses all trans women for this guy, because the uterus surgery is so far not really working out super well and has mostly ended in failure or medical complications, so while that might change in the future, for now carrying some dude's child is just something a trans woman cannot participate in. And okay, this is where I'm gonna make what can be described as a tiny concession. In that if you are a person who really, truly has one major requirement for a partner, and that requirement is that they can give you true-born children, like you're out of some kind of medieval-ass castle, sure, if that's your big thing, then 100% I get it. However, in respect to that being your big exclusionary demand of a woman who you are going to date in the long term, do you then also ensure from cis women on the first few dates or time that you meet them that they are also fertile? I know, That sounds like an insane thing to say, and one that would absolutely get you in trouble, because it seems as if you are reducing a woman down to her reproductive parts, but at the end of the day, you've made it clear that the big reason that you wouldn't date a trans woman is not because she's trans, you're okay with the trans thing, but just because being trans means that she cannot receive your sperm and fertilize her egg. Sorry for the explicit nature here, but I'm trying to make this high school education level clear what we're talking about. Well, if that is your primary denial of trans women, then surely it must be a priority when you're talking with cis women too. Because if it turns out that you wouldn't ask a cis woman on the first or second date if her uterus is fully working and functional to ensure that you're able to achieve what you want from a partner, and it turns out that you would be willing to actually maybe learn that further down the line when you've built a life with the person, and would then attempt to work around whatever issues might come up so that you can ensure that you have a family with this person that you love, that you would concede on these kind of big deals, well, then it's starting to seem like it isn't that big of a deal really, and is just a convenient excuse for immediately dismissing trans women from the dating pool for you. I mean, if you are one of those people from earlier who does question the fertility of women at the beginning of any relationship, because you are really committed to this being a biological father, then great. Your position is evidently not one you're using merely as a facade for transphobia. But you might have some other weirder stuff going on, and frankly, good luck finding a woman who doesn't think it's sort of creepy to ask her that. But this argument actually ties into another argument that develops out of it, because a core part of it is the notion that this cis man believes that he can identify a trans woman off the bat, and knows that they will not be his type. That even that hypothetical I gave earlier of, well, what if you find someone perfect for you, who you're super attracted to, but it just turns out that they're trans, would that really be a deal breaker then? A lot of guys see that and are not even able to consider the hypothetical, because to them, they are certain that they can tell all trans women from looking at them, and are able to just immediately dismiss them outright due to that certainty of what they look like. Now, I want to make it clear that this isn't going to be the part of the video where I pull up a pile of pictures of cis and trans women and then get you in the audience to figure out which ones are which before actually revealing that all of them were trans or all of them were cis. Because if you want to find that bait and switch, you can easily do so. And personally, while I get the idea behind people making those posts, I often find it a tad distasteful and disrespectful to the people whose pictures are being pulled up. And frankly, it's just unnecessary. Because, guys, here's a fact. You cannot tell trans people from just looking at them. If you believe that you have a 100% perfect transvestigation sensor, I want to ask you something quickly just to check that belief. And the question is, did you ask? Did you ask the people who you saw and believed that you had clocked? Because if you didn't, then it's entirely plausible that you have lumped a bunch of cis women into the trans category in your head for whatever reasons you might have believed them to be trans. And trust me, I have talked with a lot of women and seen a whole bunch of ways in recent years that those women have been misgendered for some stupid ass shit. Like being too tall, or having too broad shoulders, or having a little bit more than 0 Adam's apple, or having short hair, or not shaving their arms and legs, or having a voice that's slightly too deep. Societally enforced femininity is a really tight cage, and a lot of the men who are super confident of their abilities to clock trans women and to then use that to dismiss them outright are frankly working off of all of those stereotypes that have been built up for them around women's bodies. And on that same line of all the women that have been lumped into the 100% trans certainty for these cis men, what about all the trans women that you didn't think were trans and so didn't even consider them? If you didn't initially believe them to be trans, you wouldn't think to question it, and so there might be a whole bunch of trans people just going under that radar that you believe is 100% accurate. At this point, it's starting to feel like this ability to always know when someone is trans is a little bit built on a very rickety foundation, and ultimately people using that idea as a way of dismissing trans people from their dating pool is one that is based on a thing that I talk about a lot around here: the monolithic view of the trans community. Thanks to decades of media that portrays or amplifies stories of very specific versions of trans women, a lot of people have developed a bigoted stereotype of us in their mind. One that is quite often viewed as gross or hypermasculine, and the term man in a dress, it comes up quite often when you're describing this kind of thing. And so if your average person is working from that as the way that they think people of our community look, then I think it's no surprise that a cis straight man might consider that stereotype and then just outright dismiss trans women because he assumes all trans women fall into that category. Just because something has been normalized as a viewpoint for a long time doesn't make it good. And this is truly one of those cases, because it's just clearly bigotry, right? Like, that's one of the very basic ideas and tenets of transphobia, the condensing of trans women down into an outdated, narrow model that was never actually that accurate to begin with, but which bought into the othering of us as a group of people for the purpose of comedy or political gain. Like, here's the deal for this part of what I'm arguing for here when it comes to trying to get these cis men to reconsider their stance. It's not that you should have to date all trans women. I mean, I wouldn't demand that you have to date all cis women either, right? But it's merely about attempting to break down that perception that seems to believe that trans women are this separate and clearly identifiable grouping of women that you can super plausibly determine by the fact that you're not attracted to them and they're ugly. And recognizing that, much like all groups of women, there are gonna be ones that you're attracted to and there's gonna be ones that you're not. That might feel like a small step, but trust me, it is one of the biggest ones for just getting cis men to consider trans women as the same as any women. And that brings me to the final argument that I deal with, the last one that I've personally seen. Now, if I've missed any, then I guess I just haven't heard those yet, and I hope that the principles I have represented in this video, at the very least, are able to be useful in constructing responses to the rest of them. The final one, though, is the position that, hey, well, I just like vaginas, and I'm not gonna go and do stuff in the bedroom with a penis. Now, this is a stance that I think makes sense to follow on from the previous one we discussed, because you might recognize that at the core of it, this is based on that same stereotype, right? And also a little bit of a sprinkling of trans panic too. Namely, that it is built around the idea that all trans women have dicks, and also that they're going to spring that penis on you in the bedroom and try and freak you out with it because I guess we're specifically doing everything we can to target cis men and horrify them. But here is a revolutionary thing that might be quite a surprise for a few guys out there. Vaginoplasty exists. It's existed for fucking decades at this point, and you're a little out of the loop actually. If you are someone who needs their partner to have a specific genital configuration, well, while there are definitely trans women who might be excluded by that requirement, and actually, frankly, a couple of cis women too as well maybe, the human body is really quite varied, and conditions like Mayer-Rokitansky-Kusterhauser syndrome do exist, as well as genital dysgenesis, or sometimes just plain old trauma as well. I mean, but let's face it, the penis is definitely the thing that cis men are hyperfixating on and thinking about here. Well, there are trans women out there who have had surgeries and don't have a penis. They've got a vagina, so kind of feels like excluding all trans women for something that is not true for all trans women is a tiny bit transphobic, like by definition of the word. But a few of those guys then do go on to say that, well, the issue then is that I want a natural vagina, and I can tell the difference between a natural vagina and a trans woman's constructed vagina. I mean, it probably isn't going to get said that succinctly or cleanly, but that's oftentimes where the argument next moves on to, and Jesus Christ, let's just get this out of the way now. I am yet again not going to use pictures to try and display this. If you want to go and find pictures of various vaginas, you can, but there is no way in hell that you are going to be able to tell the difference. Vaginas already have a huge amount of variety to them, and trans women's vaginas just kind of slot right in there. You are lying to yourself if you think that your untrained eyes and untrained dick are gonna have the ability to sift the difference. But this buys once more into that internalized stereotyping. It buys into the rhetoric that is spread around a lot, a cruel and incredibly rude rhetoric that views all trans women as either having penises or their custom-built vaginas being gaping wounds that are not the same as a real vagina. It's yet again just straight up offensive, and also on the gaping wound part, offensive to cis women who have a history that means they also need a vaginoplasty too. Like, that's also rude as shit, but like is much the case of transphobia, cis women do just get caught in the crossfire of that bigotry. And that brings me to the final thing I want to say on this topic, which is to further expound that idea of internalized transphobia, that notion that deep down, and in a lot of ways that people are not even openly aware of or considering, there is a core of bigotry that has been developed over decades of exposure to negative representations and ideas which leads to people feeling uncomfortable around trans women and trans people in a way that they don't know how to put into words necessarily, or that they don't even feel like is bigoted because it's not them openly calling for the rights of trans people to be removed, or advocating for us to be chucked in conversion camps, or, I don't know, whatever extreme version of hate we want to go with today. And it's the fact that it is so submersed inside of your personage that makes it really hard to identify and address. That makes it seem like when someone calls you out for a behaviour that you might have, that they are just overreacting, or that it's cancel culture, or that wokeness has gone too far. I mean, don't get me wrong here. There are definitely people out there who do know that the attitudes they're holding are transphobic and are just trying to cover that shit up by latching onto this. And in those cases, like, what am I supposed to say? You are being deliberately deceptive to ensure that you don't get rightfully called out for your beliefs by people around you. I mean, I guess firstly I would say stop being a fucking coward and at least own your shittiness. And secondly, you could also maybe stop being a shitty person if you think it's clearly going to cause issues for you. I don't know, this video is not really made for those kinds of cases. It's made more for the people who don't recognize it. As you might see from all the examples I have given, that this flat-out refusal to date all trans women at all as a preference is not really a preference, and is oftentimes based in principles that would not apply to cis women in the same situation. Look, you are allowed to date whoever you want to date. You're allowed to make what choices you wish to make when it comes to those you sleep with or that you plan to be with. All that I am advocating for here is that trans women are given the same consideration as cis women in the dating scene by cis straight men. Sure, there are gonna be trans women you won't find attractive, but the same is true for cis women too. Sure, there are gonna be trans women whose family future is different to what you want to have, but the same is true for cis women. Sure, there are gonna be trans women whose body doesn't line up with what you want from a partner. The same can be true for cis women. If your dating exclusion is rooted solely in the fact that a woman is transgender as the reason for you not attempting to be with her, despite everything else getting ticked off, that is transphobic, because it is making her entire identity the fact that she is trans, and then dismissing her for the fact that she is trans, not for any other reason. And if you do that, then it might be worth having some introspection about the reasons for it. Maybe think a bit on why you hold that opinion. Consider where it comes from and take some distance to try and figure it out. Even if you still refuse to date trans women after that fact, at the very least you will better understand yourself and your reasons behind it. And I mean, shit, Jesus Christ, it will also help you be more honest with yourself and with others. Anyway, that's the video. I hope that you enjoyed it or learned something from it. It's a new direction for the channel that we're seeing, I think, a lot of here, and that's because I am trying to vary up my content. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a bit tired of doing the same sort of thing, so I want to do a bunch of different things and see what really stands out to me. I want to talk about trans content like this, talk about discussions or issues that I think I can have something to say about due to my circumstances. And so I hope that that works for some people. If you really like what I do here, then the best way to show that is by going to the links below and subscribing to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi. The names of those in the $5 category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I am super grateful to everyone on there for funding what I do with my life here. The money from that pays for stuff like my rent, my power, my internet, my food, my cat, my transition as well, and so it's pretty essential to me living my life in a way that allows me to continue working on YouTube videos and also continue being alive, which I have noticed is quite useful for it. But yeah, a gigantic thanks, and I hope that the people on there look forward to the stuff I'm going to be making in the future, which is going to be more content centered around me as a person rather than a singular topic. It's going to be me doing things that I want to talk about. Stuff like this, and things like shows that I'm watching right now that I think have interesting things to talk about with them, like Love Island, or games that I've really enjoyed in the past but also have a bit of a problem with them, like Life is Strange. The Blank Disaster series, I think, is one that I really want to focus on, because it kind of gives me a broad scope to work with, and I think that's a good way of letting yourself have fun and experiment with stuff. So yeah, hopefully the videos will be more fun and engaging going forwards, because I'm going to have more fun with them and be more engaged with them, and that is only possible because of the Patreon. Ad revenue can be a bit spotty when you're kind of testing the waters of things, and so I am relying upon the people who want to financially support my work, even when it's not working in the algorithm. But also a huge thanks here as well to all the people who engage with this kind of content, who like, share, subscribe, who go back and watch my previous videos, of which there's a ever-expanding list of things now and variety. I also want to say a big thanks to everybody who has watched this video, who liked it and who got through it. And I hope that you did find it to be educational, or that you'll be able to use it in some places in the future, or send it to people who might need to hear it. That's probably the best thing I can hope for from this sort of content. But yeah, a gigantic thanks to just about everyone who's involved in this at every possible level, and I hope that you all have a great day.